Each year, it's always a pleasure to talk to my fellow film critics about the year in review, the best and worst films of the year. And this has been such an incredible year, with cinemas being open and not being open, and streaming services exponentially increasing, etc. But it's always a pleasure to talk to Jake Wilson, who is the film reviewer at The Age, as well as other outlets. Jake, welcome again to Movie Metropolis.
Thanks, Peter. It's nice to be back and on Zoom for the first time.
Absolutely. No, good to talk. It has been quite a year. And I mean, for me, it has been a little difficult to put the top 10 together, because there's been a lot of good films to make decisions about, as well as those at film festivals and other events. Have you found that the same?
Yeah, I mean, with these lists, it's always a sort of an artificial exercise, but I always feel in order to do it at all, you need to have rules. And then you just say, well, is it films that came through cinemas? Well, this year we had long periods where there were no films coming through cinemas, and some films that maybe came notice cinemas in Sydney, say, weren't here in Melbourne, and so on. So then you say, well, is it also streaming films? And then there's such a world of streaming films. I could probably, fill up a whole list with films just on streaming services. And then there's so much more available to us when you look at it that way than there ever has been. There are literally hundreds of new films coming our way on all the different streaming services every week. And it's a drop in the bucket, what you can see, as it always has been in a sense. But, now it's possible to be much more conscious of it, like what all the options are. And then of course there's TV and so on. So it just goes on and on. So I don't know what rules you follow in drawing up these lists.
Oh, look, I mean, my preference is always for cinema releases, but I have incorporated major releases on streaming services such as Netflix, etc., which I have access to. But anyway, look, we all make our own rules anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Absolutely. Or sometimes I'm given rules by The Age or whoever, I mean, I did a little bit of a best films of the year thing for The Age, and there was some criteria because ultimately you want to some of the time at least be talking about films that people might know. Not all the time, but some of the time. So sure. You need a mix perhaps. Anyway, I have done a list or a couple of lists based on criteria I basically made up. So
sure. Which list do you want to start with?
We'll start with the worst films, which I always want to get out of the way. I don't have like a huge list of hates, although I mean, not to get ahead of myself, but I've already seen 2 films from which are out next year, which I really hated. So I'm not going to say what they are. Ooh. But maybe next year I have a longer list of hates. This year it's pretty short, and I'm not sure I even hate these films. They're just, in my judgment, they're not very good for various reasons. So it's just 5 films quickly, and going from like least disliked. It's film from near the start of the year, which is Sia's Music, with very provocative film, it turned out, for reasons I don't entirely understand, but it's just bizarre. Nothing about it works. It's a musical about an autistic girl named Music and her caregiver, who is played by Kate Hudson, role that was originally meant to be played by Shia LaBeouf, but he wasn't up for it. So they subbed in Kate Hudson, as you do. And then it's just very peculiar, and none of the creative decisions make any sense. So this is like the 5th on my list, and probably, in some ways it would be one of the worst films of the year, except it's actually not boring, because you can spend your time thinking about what the hell is this.
Okay.
To me, that has something going for it as compared to a film that is kind of competent but completely boring, which would be, for example, the next film on this list, which is A Quiet Place 2 by John Krasinski, which I feel is just an example of a a sequel that really did not need to be made. Like, you know, this is a sequel to a big hit, A Quiet Place. So obviously there's going to be a sequel when you have a hit. But the idea of, okay, these aliens are super sensitive to sound, you know, so we have to keep quiet. Maybe there are other places you can take it, but they didn't take it anywhere interesting. And once you get over the gimmick of that, I felt like, okay, the aliens are not very interesting, and really the idea of like minimizing dialogue is kind of handy because it means that the film doesn't actually have to talk about anything in some ways, and it becomes very generic. And I was bored, so that's why that's on the list. Next one I was also bored at is a film called Percy versus Goliath, which I think maybe fewer people would have seen. And it's about Christopher Walken as a seed farmer, and he goes into battle with you know, the big farming conglomerates who think he's, well, I shouldn't say seed farmer, I forget what he farms. Do you remember, Peter?
Was it canola?
Canola, perhaps. Like he's a Canadian canola farmer or something, and he's fighting, you know, the big canola giants because they say that he's stolen their seeds, and it's a message movie about, you know, probably a really good message actually about, you know, the forces of agribusiness and how they're, you know, what they're doing to small farmers. Probably that's something that people should know more about. But all I could think was, you know, I don't actually need to see Christopher Walken demonstrate he can play like a regular person. I kind of, you know he can, but like, that's not what I want to see Christopher Walken do. It's not interesting. And there's nothing, you know, there's nothing much that's interesting about, you know, the characters or, you know, the story or how the film's shot. There's this weird bit in the middle where they go to India for no reason, except there was Indian money in the film. Probably it happened in reality, but it really didn't need to be in the script. Anyway, so that's that one. Next one's a film called Second Worst Film of the Year, I think. Again, pretty bizarre, so sort of vaguely entertaining, but also kind of, I did wish it was over. Film called Twist, which is an updated version of Oliver Twist, except it's really not, because it turns out to be mostly about art theft, like a heist movie, and it, you know, it doesn't appear necessarily that anybody involved had read Oliver Twist. Like, some of the characters have the same names, and you know, Oliver's now like in his 20s, and he's like into parkour, you know, and I don't know. I don't know why you would read Oliver Twist and think, yeah, this is where we're going with it. But it has Michael Caine, and I always admire Michael Caine because he can just commit to anything, you know, and he's done it his whole career. Any old rubbish, you know, he'll deliver, and I guess he does. And you know, there are bits in this where he puts on a Russian accent because he's like a master of disguise or something. He commits to that. You know, he's about 90. You know, he's still going, and I hope they paid him well. And the worst film of the year clearly is it's a straight to streaming one, which unfortunately I was asked to review. I wouldn't have seen it otherwise. Home Sweet Home Alone by Dan Mazo, a collaborator of Sacha Baron Cohen, who has made, you know, some well, not good films in the past, but films that had certain qualities. This is like a piece of junk. It's like, it's not even a movie. It's like a sort of simulated version of a movie. It doesn't make any, even the title makes no sense, right? What does the title even mean? Like, it's just a new version of Home Alone, but they had to differentiate it somehow. But and it stars like one of the kids, not the lead, from Jojo Rabbit, who was one of the Hitler Youth, and a whole bunch of like Saturday Night Live people and so on. And it's a package on paper, I guess. But when you watch the movie, like the logic of it, why it's meant to be funny, anything about it does not work. It's like, you know, this movie was made sort of untouched by human hands, in a sense. Like, nobody wanted, you know, people wanted the movie to exist. Nobody really gave a damn about what was in it. So that's the impression I get. Anyway, so those would be the worst films of the year.
Okay, I agree with all of that. I haven't seen Home Sweet Home Alone. I think I'm not even tempted after the way you've described it.
Well, I mean, it's for, I guess, Dan Mazer completists, if there are any. There are people who swear by Dirty Grandpa. I quite like certain scenes in I Give It a Year, which has, who does it have? It has Anna Faris. She's quite funny in it. Yeah, so he's done like movies that were actual comedies. This is something else. Yeah, for this, I hope he was poorly paid, because he really put in the minimum of effort. Okay, so
Yeah, the best films.
moving on to happier things.
Yes.
So I've got a list of 20. Shall we do the full 20 and
Yeah,
just
go for it.
try and keep it sort of brief, because I could probably talk for quite some time about any one of these films.
Yeah, no, keep the comments relatively short, but I'm happy to hear all 20.
Okay, so I'll try and just say one or two things about each film.
Yeah.
And the bottom of the list, sort of just moving up it. And by the way, I have included films that were at film festivals in a couple of cases, films that went to streaming and big screen releases. But I have arbitrarily tried to keep it to films that were first available in Melbourne to see in one form or another in 2021. And this is pedantic, but it means that, for example, First Cow is not on this list because it was at MIF in 2020, just for the record.
Yeah.
And I know these rules are just meaningless, but you have to kind of draw lines around what you're including somewhere. So I would have had First Cow on the list otherwise. At the number 20, I guess, is Paul Schrader's The Card Counter, which I was sort of talked into seeing, because I haven't seen a lot of Paul Schrader's recent films. Actually, I haven't seen First Reformed, which I know many people rate really, really highly.
Yes.
One I was sort of coaxed into seeing, largely, I guess, because of the cast. I like Oscar Isaac, who's the lead, and Tiffany Haddish, and it is very much Paul Schrader doing what he always does, a film about a solitary guy and him sort of wrestling with himself, and in this case, as the title says, he's a card counter, so he's focused on playing like blackjack, and how he can take on the house by focusing on every card that gets played, and he does nothing else with his life. Like, he was in prison, now he's out of prison, he might as well be in prison still, because he's doing nothing except counting cards. And then he meets both a woman and a young man who he sort of mentors, and things follow from that. And there's also well, it's not a subplot, but there's also an element of the film which is about Abu Ghraib, which is kind of incongruous in a way, but it all works in a strange way. It's like very ritualized, kind of. I felt like Schrader knows that a lot of the people watching this have seen him do versions of this kind of thing before, but everything's very controlled, and the performances work, the rooms work. They're these kind of rather drab spaces that you move through. The music, the pacing of it, and then especially Tiffany Haddish, who sort of provides a lot of the element of I guess humanity in the film, but gives a really different performance from these usual performances that she's kind of been typecast in, where she's this sort of live wire hustler character. I mean, you could say she's a sort of a hustler here, but she's a much calmer sort of presence, much more grown up, quite different. So I was taken by it. Next on the list is a film that only went to streaming. Don't know how many people saw it. It's a film called The Kid Detective. Did you see this, Peter?
No, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's on my list mainly, I guess, for the lead performance by Adam Brody, who from the OC, who's had a bit of a resurgence lately. He was in what's the name of that film about the the Evil Family, like the 1% Evil Family horror film, and they're hunting down. You know the film I mean?
Vaguely.
They play a game. Like they're playing hide and seek, and it's like a deadly version of hide
Oh,
and seek.
yes. It's not going to come to me, but I know the film you mean. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Keep going.
Anyway, Adam Brody, never mind. Adam Brody is like, he's really gifted comic actor, or he's become a really gifted comic actor. He's really got like beautiful timing and just a sense of you know, when to push something, when to understate it. And he's playing here, literally the idea is like he was a kid detective, like in kids' books, like an Encyclopedia Brown type, you know, those sorts of kids' books. Now he's grown up and he's kind of a loser, but he's still being like the kid detective. And so it's kind of a parody, but as it goes on, it gets kind of increasingly depressing. Like he's living in this very depressing like version of the real world, basically. It's by a Canadian director, I believe, Evan Morgan, but it's set in kind of almost a fantasy world, but not super stylized like a Wes Anderson fantasy world. And it's a little bit more like, well, it's not really like Blue Velvet, but you can see that there's maybe a bit of a Blue Velvet influence there. So it's tonally quite tricky, but then Adam Brody really just pulls it all together. He really, like the whimsy doesn't sort of overbalance the darker aspects and vice versa, because he really has a handle on exactly what this film's meant to be.
Okay.
And that's pretty rare. I mean, to have a performance like that in a film that really could not have worked at all. So I recommend that. Speaking of Wes Anderson, I put it on my list, but I haven't put it as close to the top as some people would. I put Wes Anderson's The French Dispatch here on my list. And I like this. You know, I really wasn't sure if I was going to like it. I really do like it, The French Dispatch. I like all these films a lot. I feel like it's a kind of his most far out film, maybe since The Life Aquatic. Like, everything about it goes too far. That's what's appealing about it to me. Like some of that sort of, you know, everything has to be whimsical. Like every prop, every turn of phrase, every single thing has to be like, you know, exaggerated and kind of quirky. And that, you know, is on the one hand intensely annoying. On the other hand, when you take it far enough, it becomes something else. It becomes something kind of, you know, undeniably singular. And I did feel also that he gave some a bit more space to his actors, and he sometimes does, especially maybe Jeffrey Wright. Also, Timothy Chalamet is kind of the ultimate Wes actor. I feel like he's going to be in every Wes Anderson film from now on, because he just has that sort of hangdog quality, that flat but ever so slightly whiny delivery, which, you know, Jason Schwartzman was kind of the previous bar to clear, but I think Timothy Chalamet has kind of cleared it, and now he's going to be the new Wes alter ego for another 15 years or so. But there's a lot to be said about that film. It's really, in a strange way, very sincere, and it lays out everything that Wes Anderson feels about, you know, art and, you know, politics, sex, whatever. It's all kind of, it's like an encyclopedia of everything he thinks about life, I think. But
yep,
there's way too much to try and talk about it, really. Just continuing. Next is a film that was at MIFF, which was, of course, a virtual MIFF, sadly, as it turned out. Going from, I guess, maximalism of a sort to minimalism is Simon Lang's Days. Which is like a really, it's like a minimal filmmaker. This guy's great Taiwanese filmmaker, has always been extremely short on stuff like, you know, plot or things happening. You know, a lot of the time you're just kind of in a space with him, drinking in the space. This one, even more so, like in a sense, it's, I gather it's something he shot piecemeal, kind of, you know, over, you know, maybe a couple of years even, without much of a plan, and gradually it pieces together into a sort of a narrative. And it's like all his films, it's about loneliness, I guess, and people very gradually coming together and also about textures. And the centerpiece of it is this long encounter between two guys, which takes the form basically of a massage scene. And I feel like it goes for maybe 20 minutes. It could be shorter or longer because it kind of lose track of time after a while. It's not, you're not sort of waiting for the next thing. You're just kind of in the space. And he completely stopped making narrative films, or he said he was going to stop, and kind of made more installation type pieces for a while. And this is sort of a comeback. In another sense, it's very close to a non-narrative film. But he's, I mean, he's still an interesting guy. I mean, he's got kind of a sort of philosophical side. There's a lot to, you know, again, you can talk about it for a long time.
Okay.
Next film, I think we're up to, I know,
16
maybe. Another change of pace. Film called, again, didn't get a theatre release, although I think it was originally meant to. A film called Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. You see this one?
No, I didn't.
But you would have maybe heard of this one. This was going to be like a you know, quite a theatrical release sort of thing. It's got Kristen Wiig and Annie Mumolo, the woman she wrote Bridesmaids with, who's like her longtime collaborator. And it's basically the two of them doing this like feature-length, I don't know, double talk routine where they're two kind of middle-aged kind of, I guess, normcore kind of women, like these sorts of women who go to book groups and stuff, and they're always talking over each other, and they agree about everything. They're very enthusiastic about everything, and they always agree. It's the opposite of the usual comedy double act where, you know, it's two people at loggerheads. These two just agree about everything, and and it's wonderful. And then they go to Florida and they get involved in like a, you know, this, you know, random like plot to kill everybody in this holiday resort. And they save the day. With apologies for spoilers, but I mean, it's just, I mean, it's pure nonsense, you know. But there's not as much nonsense around as there once was. I feel like, you know, the Wes Anderson is, you know, it's a little bit nonsensical, but he's a bit uptight about it.
Okay, interesting. Okay, keep going.
Again, yeah, I didn't do this deliberately, but we seem to be really veering, you know, from between drastically different tones. Next one is film I had sort of mixed feelings about when I saw it, but it's really stuck with me. It was at the British Film Festival, Terence Davies' film Benediction, about the poet Siegfried Sassoon, who's I guess best known for his poems about the First World War, which he was in, very sort of angry, bitter, satirical poems. And Terence Davies, I guess, is somebody who resonates with a lot of those feelings of anger and bitterness. And really, it's partly about the war, but it's very largely about his life afterwards. He's played by Jack Lauder, who was in, what's he been in? He was in the wrestling movie, Fighting with My Family.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, he's, Sassoon was gay, and a lot of it is really about having to live what is referred to in the film as a shadow life, and sort of never feeling that you can sort of live fully with another person, and these various relationships he has, both with guys and then, you know, getting married to a woman, and none of it is really, you know, what he might have wanted exactly, which maybe isn't just, you know, because of his sexuality, but because of a whole lot of reasons. And it's a very strange film. The dialogue is very strange, extremely kind of artificial dialogue. It takes a while to get used to. It's kind of almost, I mean, a lot of it is kind of comic. It's kind of this very particular sound of people being witty, like self-consciously witty, but beneath that is this sense of despair. And what is especially extraordinary is what it does with this film does with Peter Capaldi, who plays the older version of Sassoon. And I've never seen Peter Capaldi used like this, where you go from, the young man who's quite quite fresh-faced, some pleasant chap, and then you see him sort of morph into Capaldi, who's kind of dried up and despairing and sort of resigned to himself. But you can see so much pain just by looking at him. I don't know how Capaldi himself managed to embody this, but the force of it is so strong that the things in the film that don't work for me so well, I'm kind of willing to live with.
Yep. Yeah, I was impressed by the film too. Yep.
Okay, so next one, again, very different. A film came out just lately, Don't Look Up, which Adam McKay's, I guess, satirical, what do you call it, smorgasbord about about the end of the world, about how nobody wants to think about the end of the world. And it's really, I mean, in a lot of ways, what it amounts to, this movie. The plot, as you know, it's about a couple of scientists, Jennifer Lawrence and Leonardo DiCaprio, and they find out a comet is going to destroy the planet, but nobody wants to hear about it. And that's kind of a familiar premise on the one hand, because we've had a lot of end of the world movies. But the way McKay uses it is basically as a satire on show business and just popular culture, maybe culture in America generally, like the stupidity of everything, and how like people were just willing to consume any sort of stupidity rather than focus on things that might be important. And of course, yeah, he's much more entertained by the stupidity than he is, in a sense, talking about climate change, which is, I guess, what the film is really about. But it's so in a strange way, the film is both harrowing on the one hand, and on the other hand, like, it's a lot of fun, because you get to see like Meryl Streep play a sort of a Trump-like president. If you've ever wanted to see what Meryl Streep would be like playing Trump, here's your chance. To see Jonah Hill give what probably is his funniest performance since Wolf of Wall Street. Chalamet is back. When Chalamet shows up, it's a long way into the film, I just kind of shriek with laughter, because he just looks so ridiculous. I won't even say what his brother's like, and so on. It's just, and they're all kind of queuing up to, basically humiliate themselves and say how idiotic, the whole Hollywood thing is. The only thing I could maybe compare it to in that light is Mars Attacks. It doesn't have the the visual qualities of Mars Attacks, but it gives the actors probably more rope. I mean, Jack Nicholson is great in Mars Attacks, but this kind of just gives everybody a lot of scope to try out some sort of wacky performance they wouldn't get to do in any other context.
Yep, I agree.
I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, because that film had very, very mixed reception.
Oh, I loved it.
As has the next film on my list, among people I've talked to, which is Jane Campion's The Power of the Dog, which I think really rests first and foremost, because I have heard very varying reactions to it, and I think it really does depend on how you feel about Benedict Cumberbatch in the lead role, because I've never really been that much of a fan of Benedict Cumberbatch, but here he's playing a character who maybe doesn't seem so logical for him to play, a sort of American rancher who's he's repressed, so he's got like the English repression, I guess you could say, is part of what Cumberbatch does, but he's not so obviously in other ways in Cumberbatch's wheelhouse, as the Americans say, and you can feel that's sort of unconvincing, or you can find it interesting that this is, as presented, a character who has a lot of layers, and even when you're given some of the keys to his character, you don't necessarily know what makes him tick entirely, because he's very bright, he kind of hides a lot, and then all the characters in the film are kind of complicated, and the film, like, you basically have three other characters. You have his brother, played by Jesse Plemons. You have the woman the brother marries, played by Kirsten Dunst, and then who's a widow, and then her son, played by Cody Smith McPhee. And really, the film is the cross currents between those four. And it's, to me, it's kind of a classic melodrama in that sense. Like, it's been billed as a Western, but it's not really a Western because an awful lot of it is indoors. So most of the time it's kind of just these characters playing off each other and how does each feel about the others. And then it builds to a suitably kind of over the top climax, as melodramas tend to do. Jane Campion's always interesting. I mean, she's always interested in people, I feel, and how messed up they can be in unpredictable ways, and that's something that's maybe not so common in American cinema. She's working in an American context here. Like, the people are not fully legible, even though as I say, we're given certain keys. Yep. I was really, again, really taken by it.
Yes, me too.
Next film, The Girl and the Spider, again, one that played Myth and not, I think, elsewhere, by a couple of Swiss brothers, Ramon and Sylvain Zurcher. So like a Swiss-German film. How do I describe this? It's have you seen it, Peter?
Yes, I have. It reminds me of another German film a few years ago. Title escapes me. That sort of minimalist sort of approach to character development and to story, and it is quite persuasive, I thought. But anyway, you go on.
It's a really tricky film because it's very kind of, it looks almost normal on the surface, not quite, because the framing is a little bit off, or there are details that are a little bit off, but you kind of think you've got the basic situation where it's somebody moving out of an apartment. And then after a while you start to feel, hang on, am I not following this properly, or does this really not make sense? Like what's going on here? Like, the shots don't seem to quite connect with each other quite like they should, and so on. Things seem to be awry. Odd things happen, with people's bodies. There are dialogue, non sequiturs, or things that seem like non sequiturs, and so on. And it is like the bits of the story have kind of been shuffled, or things within the shot have been shuffled. All sorts of things happen. There's like a cold sort that goes from one character to another, and it's in a weird way very once you start to get into it and sort of start to understand what the film is doing, it becomes very entertaining because you feel the film is playing with you. It's playing a variety of games with you, and to engage, you kind of have to you kind of have to wake up and play along a bit. You have to pay attention and see what you think is happening for yourself. You can't just sit back and watch it. And it's funny. And as I say, it seems very calm, but it's also kind of a provocation.
Yes. I'm trying to remember the German film. I think the same filmmakers, The Cat on the Table or something like that. I'm trying to remember the title, which also had that same approach.
I know they've done a previous film, which I've yet to see. I think it's called, I may have this wrong, something like The Precious Little Cat.
Something like that. Yeah.
Somebody who's watching this will know, and I have every intention of going back and watching it, but I haven't yet. Actually, no, this actually makes a weirdly good segue to the next film, which in a completely different way plays some related games, which is M. Night Shyamalan's Old, which I like M. Night Shyamalan, another polarizing, you might say, director. I don't like all his films equally. I think this one's very inventive. It's got, a kind of surefire premise where, people, I'll give it away. Basically, the characters, there's a family, they wind up on a beach and time speeds up. So, like, they're aging years in the space of hours. I think most people, even going into the film, probably will know it's some version of that. So what that means is, characters can disappear off screen, and when they come back, it's a new actor. It's like somebody who's like grown up, or something like that, or they can just like have changed in appearance, and it's all happening in this one space on the beach. But there are things that we can see clearly, things that are out of focus, things that are off screen, and then again, there's all sorts of oddities in the film. Just really typical M. Night Shyamalan oddities, names of characters, things that are kind of on the one hand really heavy-handed, and then on the other hand just bizarre. He's got a very odd sense of humor, and this comes out in this film, even though it's also a film about the the inevitability of aging and death. So not not in theory an upbeat subject, right? But and it is at some points kind of depressing, and at other points it is fun. It's a lot of things. He's one of a kind. That's all I can say about M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah.
But this is a really visually and sort of conceptually inventive film, including the finale where we get a whole other layer to it. I'm sensing you weren't sold on this.
You're sensing correctly. It's on my list of one of the worst films of the year, because I think the last scenes, the last 10 minutes, are actually a cheat. And so what the film is about is actually nothing to do with what we've been seeing, but is really about those last 10 minutes, without giving any spoilers away. And I really felt that he had to put a twist in the story, because he has to have a twist in every film. And I think in this one, it was totally ineffective, because it for me, ruined everything that had gone previously.
Well, he is famous for his twists, and there was a period where I think he resisted that. Not every film needs to have a twist, and now I think he's taken it on board. That this is part of what people expect from. So it becomes another part of the game, because all the way through, right, we are thinking, okay, what's the twist? We know there's a twist. What's the twist? And I will say, I did not exactly get it right. I mean, it's not sprung on you all at once, right? We kind of get a sense of it gradually, but even so, I didn't quite figure out where he was going with this.
Yeah, no, I didn't. But anyway, that's okay. Let's move on.
Next one. Sticking now with the Hollywood mainstream, the other maybe mainstream Hollywood film I really got into this year, James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, which is again, sort of maybe a polarizing director. He got to make this film because the Marvel Disney people fired him for tweeting inappropriately. So he made all these really offensive jokes on Twitter, and they fired him. And then, of course, Warner Brothers said, "Come over here and make a film for us." And so he makes a film which is about all these people who have gone to jail, and they get one last shot, which seems kind of pointed. It's a sequel to the first Suicide Squad, but what that means is basically he keeps some of the characters and premise where these hardened supervillains are being sent out on a mission, and they could be killed at any time, and probably will be. But he does his own thing with it. He's a very, I think he's a very disturbed person, basically, James Gunn. I think he's got a very, a lot of people can have a dark sense of humor, but I think with him, there's like something. Like he's dealing with a lot of issues in his films, like personal issues. I'm not sure I necessarily need to know all about what they are, but I can just feel it. And it is a film where there's an awful lot of violence, which is kind of, it's all fun, all fun and entertaining, except there are moments where, you're kind of meant to wake up to yourself a bit and think, is this really so fun and entertaining? What are we doing? And that's kind of the trick. That's the game of it again, that he's kind of messing with us a bit. He pushes things a bit further than he really should. And he's also got a real imagination, like a visual imagination, imagination for ideas. He takes all this sort of stuff from the comic books he's adapting, but then he pushes it way up, like the whole concept of his polka dot man, who has this awful disease, which means he literally sprouts out in polka dots, so that he can use the polka dots as a weapon. And then he has this he's like Norman. He's also like Norman Bates in Psycho at the same time. He's obsessed with his mother, and it's just, there's a whole lot of stuff in this that nobody would think of, except James Gunn. But it's also done with great showmanship. and which allows them to put things across. Like some people can have crazy ideas and the ideas just sit there, but he has a real sense of showmanship.
Yep. Yeah, I didn't. Yep.
You again, not quite sold.
Not quite a soul, but I felt stronger about this one, Suicide Squad, but much better than the initial Suicide Squad. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Which, although it should be said that the director of that, David Ayer, has said since that he didn't really get to do his version of it. Like there was a whole lot of intervention on the part of the studio, and we may yet get the Ayer cut of like the first Suicide Squad, like we got the Snyder cut of Justice League, which is not on my list, but you know, was, I mean, to me, of interest. I mean, I think, you know, some of these superhero films are really kind of, you know, bland and formulaic, and some of them are, you know, somewhat interesting because it's an opportunity for filmmakers to work on a large scale with a lot of resources, and if they get enough control, you know, you can kind of go to town. You can do anything.
Okay.
Within the formula. Anyway, I digress.
Moving on.
Moving on. Film I just saw not very long ago. I think it only had the one screening, but it was a public screening, so I'm allowing it on my list. Yeah, Apichatpong Aesthetical's Memoria, which I don't think this was at MEF. Maybe it was meant to be at MEF. I can't remember. I sure didn't.
Yeah.
But you know, it's a film that, you know, it's been through festivals. It's this, you know, now pretty celebrated Thai director who was making his first film in English with Tilda Swinton. You know, in the past he's just used actors who aren't even professional actors, who are just kind of people he knows. Now he's got Tilda Swinton, and he's really also strangely got quite a large following ever since he made that film Uncle Boonmee Who Can Recall His Past Lives, which one it can't. He's, I think partly because of the title of that film, people remember the title. Like he's actually, you know, got a surprisingly large number of fans. And he, which, I mean, when I say surprising, not because he isn't very gifted, but because the film's, on one level, very little happens, you know, you kind of, and even doesn't happen in an exciting way. I mean, it's not even necessarily obvious why it's not boring at times. Like there, I actually spent this is a film. The plot is basically Tilda Swinton hears a mysterious sound, and like the film is her attempt to trace the source of that sound. That's basically the plot. And in between, you get a lot of waiting around. There's long scenes where she's like talking to some guy in a recording studio, or you're seeing a band rehearse, or she's crossing the street. Just very, you know, mundane things filmed in a not obviously exciting way. And I did spend quite a bit of this film thinking, why am I not bored? What is his secret? It's not Tilda Swinton, and because, you know, he hasn't had it before. And then, you know, it's kind of obvious. It's actually is the sound mostly. Like, you know, these are films where you listen as much as you watch, and even when what you're listening to is kind of variations on room tone, which is quite a bit of it. It's kind of textured. Like there's stuff going on the soundtrack, and he puts you in a bit of a trance. And you know, I think he really does it sonically. And now this new film is really directly about that. It's also about this idea of people kind of sharing dreams, so to speak, having some sort of connection, which is non-literal, where like they both perceive something which the rest of the world doesn't perceive. I could give spoilers here. There is a plot in this, even though it's not a complicated plot in the conventional sense. But hypnotic is a pretty good word. I'm looking forward to seeing it again, but I would recommend, if you possibly can, seeing this either in a theatre or in, you know, some context where there's really good sound.
Okay.
Next film, sort of back. This was actually, I think, a really good year for you know, the Hollywood, or kind of the mainstream slash semi-mainstream. I felt, you know, that Hollywood has had some really weak years. in recent times. But this year, I thought, yeah, mostly, admittedly, these are not new upcoming filmmakers who are getting to do interesting things. They're older filmmakers, you know, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, or older. But at least there is still that generation of filmmakers who, I guess, because they have such a track record, have been given a degree of freedom. And that's kind of what this film embodies. Maybe I've given away what it is. No?
No?
No, this is Clint Eastwood. This is Clint Eastwood's Cry Macho.
Ah, right.
Which I mean, I'm a fan. You know, I will sort of happily accept almost anything he chooses to do. I wasn't convinced about Jersey Boys, but someday I'll go back, because it was probably me. You can never. I think it's a bad idea to underestimate Clint. This one is so bare bones that it's, I mean, it's funny how bare bones it is. It's sort of a comedy. It's, you know, he's like a rodeo rider. He's like 90 years old. He's going on one last mission, so to speak. He's driving across the border to rescue some kid. And then they have to make their way back to Texas. And on the way they have adventures, but and then there's like bonding and you know, life lessons dispensed, except, you know, the adventures aren't even quite adventures, and the lessons are so kind of resigned, they're almost not lessons, although they are still lessons. I think Clint is always interested in teaching us some lessons, but it's so laid back that the whole film is a sort of lesson in, like, no, don't push anything, don't force anything, just let it happen. If it's going to happen, it'll happen. If not, not. You know, that's the whole spirit of it. And just also seeing Clint Eastwood at the age of, I think, 90 or 91, you know, the guy who's been a movie star since the 60s and has literally allowed himself to get older and frailer on screen, like film by film. There's something really moving about that, and just extraordinary that this has happened, that he's still here after all these years, and not only still here, but still, you know, directing movies and still kind of making himself into the subject of those movies. Like, he's here saying, actually, yeah, I'm 91, but I'm still a movie star. Nobody else has done this. I don't know how he has done it.
Yeah, no, you're right. He has this sort of an interesting conservative personality, and but he also likes to, as you say, put forward messages about working together and being culturally inclusive and all that sort of thing, especially as that crops up in this film as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, politically you might say he's a libertarian, I guess, but he's, you know, I know he's no longer a member of the Republicans. Yeah. But I think, you know, what he believes in above all, and this comes out in film after film, is that people should make up their own mind, that they should have kind of faith in their own judgment. They shouldn't let anybody dictate to them, you know, anybody else dictates them, they should believe, and so on. And many of his films have that. It's a direct theme.
Yes. Okay, I've lost track of numbers. What are we up to now? Number?
I don't know either. We're definitely in the top 10, I would say.
Yeah, about number 4 or 5.
I think we got, let me see, a bit lower than that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So do I need to go a bit faster? We're running out of time.
A little bit. We are. Yes.
Okay. Let's go a bit faster. Okay. Yeah. So the next one is a Australian production, which I'm actually been trying to write an essay about. Played at MEF. It may break my rule, because it may actually have been available to see in Melbourne via the streaming version of the Revelation Film Festival last year. I'd have to check that. But anyway, it's a documentary or an essay film, or I guess you might say meditation. It's kind of an overused word, but whatever you would call it, on the Rajneesh movement, which was the subject of the Netflix series Wild Wild Country, which aired a couple of years back. So kind of what some people would call, it's a loaded word, a cult, but they tried to establish a community. They did establish a community in Oregon in the 1980s. and this documentary called The Beloved, 4 hours long, by an Australian, Joseph London, is kind of about the Australian branch of that movement in Fremantle. And it's now once kind of a document of like the people who belong to that movement, who are basically the only people whose voices you hear on the soundtrack. And then on the other hand, a kind of study of Fremantle, because the images are mostly present day Fremantle and don't necessarily connect in an obvious way with what you're hearing. And again, it's kind of designed to put you in a meditative state. I wouldn't say hypnotic, but it's designed to kind of get you thinking and feeling about how these people felt at the time about all this stuff that they believed in, this religious guru who they were following, how they feel about it now, what's changed and hasn't changed, sort of how things in general have changed and haven't changed, say in Fremantle, where they are, sort of cycles of life, the tide coming in and out, or container ships leaving, sunrise, sunset, all that sort of stuff in the images, and then in kind of indirect or metaphoric ways. It's kind of related to the stories that you're hearing. I think it's pretty extraordinary. It's definitely the most remarkable Australian film I saw this year.
Yeah, I don't know it. Okay, right.
Well, it's one to stake out. I'm not absolutely sure where you can see it right now, but I'm sure it'll be available in due time, streaming somewhere.
Okay, all right, I'll look out for it.
Another sort of a documentary. Again, it's real hard to place this one, but I certainly got into it and felt it was important. And I don't even know whose film this is, in a sense, is Hopper/Wells is another thing that screamed at myth. So Dennis Hopper and Orson Welles, two icons of cinema, and basically an encounter they had one night in the 70s, where it's Wells talking to Hopper. Hopper's on camera and Wells is off camera. And they're basically having a discussion about politics, about acting, about directing, about a whole number of subjects, partly as themselves and partly as the characters, or at least Wells as the main character in his film, The Other Side of the Wind, which was released on Netflix a couple of years ago. So this is all material which was shot supposedly for The Other Side of the Wind. But you can feel like this footage, which has been edited and I guess reshaped to a degree, you can feel that, well, as Wells was shooting this footage of Hopper, something happened where he just became aware that this was like almost a thing in itself. Like this was like a film, I think, which he had to steer in some way, where he's really pushing Hopper and almost taunting him, kind of trying to make him justify his positions, trying to ask him what he thinks, about, politics and so on. And it's an encounter between like two guys who were both mavericks, but mavericks of really different generations. And they're both really conscious of this. And it's like a fencing match in one way, even though they also like each other. But it's very, very dramatic. It's like real life drama, and it's got all these layers because both guys are actors. They're both so aware of playing roles as they speak to each other on more levels than one. Really remarkable thing.
Yeah.
So that's, we are getting near the top now. Okay, so I think this is the top 5. Okay, so Mount streaming film, Romanian director Cristi Puiu. And this is a guy, I guess, associated with what was once called the Romanian New Wave, but pretty singular film. It's based on a text by a Russian philosopher, and it's about the ethics of violence. The text, but it's written in the form of like a dialogue between a group of people at like a country house. So in the movie, it's a literal staging of that text. A bunch of people meet up at this house, supposedly in Transylvania about 1900, and they have all this discussion about, a lot of it's about Christianity, about Jesus, and then about the ethics of violence. And that's one level of the film. And partly what I like about it is it gives room for that text to kind of breathe and us to take it in without necessarily telling us what we're meant to think about it. And then there are other levels to it to do with how the text has been staged, how this drama is also like about the people in the house, and then certain games are played with the larger narrative, which I won't give away. It's really is very, very cunning and singular thing. It's a very long film. It's I think over 3 hours, but it sounds like it's going to be maybe a slog, but for me it wasn't a slog. And I think once you get into it, not a slog, but it's probably better to see on the big screen. It is on movie, however.
Okay.
Okay. Number 4 was at Japanese Film Festival. Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, by the Japanese director, obviously, Ryosuke Hamaguchi. It's anthology of 3 stories, and I've liked his previous films, and I know he has a new one coming in the new year. He's made like 2 films really quickly back to back. The other one's called Drive My Car, I believe. I'm really looking forward to that. But this is just delightful, and it has it's both kind of delightful and it has a kind of a sense of danger to it. It's really about it's 3 stories about men and women, I guess, kind of confronting each other, and well, not entirely about men and women. The last one's about 2 women, but in each case there's some sort of masquerade or something going on. There's some sort of hidden agenda, like roles are not necessarily what they appear to be at first. Things shift around, and suddenly, you know, some of the characters turn out to be much more dangerous than they might first appear. But great pleasure to watch. Top 3, okay. Number 3 is Leos Carax's Annette, which is his version of a musical. He's a real he's a maverick, you know. Leos Carax, he's a maverick among mavericks. Like each of his films is like its own singular thing, no two are similar. And this one is his first English language film. It's his first musical. It has, like, you know, recognizable stars. It has Adam Driver giving really a sort of tour de force performance as a quite extraordinarily unpleasant character, who is a stand-up comedian he and Marion Cotillard are lovers, but to not give spoilers, it doesn't work out too well, and that's I guess the story of the film is their love affair and what follows. But everything is kind of at once exaggerated and turned almost into burlesque, and then on the other hand made kind of hard to take. Like, this is not a feel-good musical. It's kind of the opposite of that. And even the songs are kind of hard to take in a variety of ways. Like there are songs where the lyrics just keep repeating. They're not like, you know, clever lyrics. They're just kind of singing out loud what they feel. Even if it's like, we love each other, or whatever. It's experience. Yeah, I think, you know, even people who don't necessarily go away with a 100% positive feeling about it will know that they've seen something.
Fully agree with you. And the Sparks brothers, who provide the music and so on, it's such a haunting film in many respects, especially with the way some of the storyline develops, which we won't spoil to people.
Yeah, it's hard not to give spoilers. What I will say is I find the final shot before the credits very haunting, and, you know, there's probably more than one way it can be interpreted, but yeah, the way that everything is artificial, everything is fake, everything is like a representation of the real thing, and yet it hits in some ways, you know, so directly emotionally. It's kind of the extraordinary thing about it.
Yes. Great.
So at the top, strangely enough, 2 films I saw really in maybe almost the last week or little more, like 2 films that are yet to come out, which both of which I was over the moon about. That's never happened before.
Oh,
I think one film on Boxing Day, but to have like the top 2 films, my favorite films of the year,
I'm
both
guessing which one of them might be, but keep going. I won't say.
Well, tell me afterwards which you guess, because you can guess. I mean, you might guess at both of them, but I mean, given what the options are.
Yes.
But I tell you, the first one is, and I don't feel much to choose between them in terms of which comes first.
Yeah.
But is the Spielberg West Side Story, which I think is so much more than I thought it was going to be. I mean, it's amazing that for the first time in decades we have a real musical in like a Hollywood musical, because there are other sorts of musicals. And there's like a musical like Annette, but we have a real Hollywood musical in cinemas. It's not like La La Land or something. It's not like a take on the musical. It's not like, oh, we can't make musicals anymore. How sad is that? But we can still do something. Blah, blah, blah. No, this is the real thing. And Spielberg, when you think about it, he's always been, mounting production numbers. That's kind of what he does. He always wants to ramp it. I mean, you think of the climax of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right? That's a big musical number. Literally, that's what it is. But since then, he's got so into kind of choreographing everything, choreographing the actors and the camera and moving it all around and seeing how sort of fleetly he can kind of pull off certain bits of exposition and convey something visually as quickly as possible. And now he's working with a real choreographer who's adapted Jerome Robbins' original choreography and surefire piece of material, both the Shakespeare level where it's Romeo and Juliet, and then the other level where it's Sondheim and Leonard Bernstein. Like this is, I mean, there are flaws in the show maybe, but it works. This 50s musical works, and then he's got a terrific screenwriter, Tony Kushner. So all the things that can be problems in Spielberg's films are really not problems. And he can just do what he does, which he does with almost kind of unmatched facility, but also I felt in this with real feeling, which is rarer in Spielberg, because you can so often feel the feeling is forced and kind of not really about the thing that it's supposed to be about. But with this, I didn't feel that at all. Even Ansel Elgort, who I thought was going to be a problem, who is really quite he's kind of smirky and irritating. Even that did not bother me, that he was playing the romantic leading man, because you feel that, if this guy can be swept away by love, it must be like something serious, It must be. It must be the real thing. And then there's, he has the one moment at the end when it all comes crashing down, and it's extraordinary how Spielberg doesn't oversell it at that moment. And there are many extraordinary things in this film. Rita Moreno, who's in the original and returns here, and has an amazing scene, which is taken from the earlier version, but has been rethought.
Yeah.
The Mike Faist, who plays Rick, is extraordinary. I was not expecting to be as caught up in this as I was. And then the other one is probably the one I'm suspecting you guessed, Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, almost like another musical, because it's so music driven. Like there are so many cues that kind of the music kicks in, and then you're off and away, and there's a whole sequence which is set to a particular song, even though the characters aren't literally singing, and they're all kind of hits and memories from this era, the early 70s or a bit earlier, and it goes from like David Bowie to like something from the 40s, but it's all stuff that people might have been hearing in this era when it's set in the California, in the Valley, like the Valley, the San Fernando Valley. And I love Paul Thomas Anderson because he always, again, I can't remember who else I was saying this about, but he's somebody who takes things way over the top, and like everything about this film is almost too much. Like the plot of it is like a whole lot of things are not explained. It's about this kid, like this 15-year-old who's got this crush on a woman who's maybe 25, maybe a bit older, and does everything he can to impress her. It's a little bit like Rushmore, the Wes Anderson film. but he sort of succeeds in this case. And he really is all the things he says he is. He's like a movie star in a small way. He was a child actor anyway, and he's been in movies, and then he's also a businessman. He's like a business whiz kid. He's bizarrely confident. He's bizarrely successful. And he's also, I mean, he's also ridiculous, but he's kind of the real deal. We know that, you know, whatever he does, he's going places. And all these things happen in the film, which just seem like dreams, you know, stuff where, like, in reality, it doesn't really make sense, but in a dream, you would accept it. And in this film, you accept it because you just get drawn into the dream. And it's also because you feel, or I felt, that everything that happens, everything the actors do, even the smallest things the actors do, Paul Thomas Anderson is just so into it, just like every scene, every little bit part, you know, every costuming choice. It's all stuff that he's thought about, and all stuff that he's like, oh yeah, and he wants more. Yeah, so that's very hard for me to resist. So there you go.
Well, your top film coincides with my top film of the year, so
perfect.
It's. I mean, Paul Thomas Anderson is such a good writer, and I love the way he satirizes really the 70s and everything that happened during that period, with obviously his own background. And but yes, the cameos or the performance of Bradley Cooper, for goodness sake.
Oh yeah, and Sean Penn, who's playing well, it's kind of William Holden and also Steve McQueen, and he, again, it's like this, but a totally ridiculous version of 50s type actor. Like, but he does it with so much care. It's almost more than a satire. Like, the character is so absurd, but he's so you believe that somebody could be absurd in kind of this way, and almost exactly this way. And it reminded me how good Sean Penn can be, because he can be very trying. But he's you know, he has like 3 scenes, and how much work do you reckon he put in to get to where he's at in those 3 scenes?
I'm sure a lot. Jake, excellent list. Excellent list. It's a really diverse and, as always, diverse range of films, and which is all we can expect from a good list of best films of the year and worst as well. So terrific stuff. Thanks so much for that, and we'll obviously see each other again in the new year when a number of other films are being thrown at us very quickly, because January is proving to be a very big release pattern as well, by the looks of it.
Yes, well, as I said, I had some, well, I was going to say complex feelings, but they really weren't so complex. I had some strong feelings about a couple of the films that are going to be released in January, which will be expressed in print in due time. That's
fine. And when we catch up, I'll ask you what those 2 films are that you hated. I think that's always interesting discussion.
Thanks, Peter. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and get to talk about these films that I really like.
Absolutely. Jake Wilson from The Age film reviewer, talking about his worst films, but mainly the best films of the year. Jake, thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter.
Bye-bye.